otherwise this will be a 4-hour session. So the GMT Postdoc. So we have money now to hire a new postdoc since Leo just left. They just left. We worked on the team on the description, the project description, or the position description. There are some issues with this thing. I checked with University of Hawaii. They are okay with hiring someone in a telecommuting mode. This was true before COVID, but it's definitely true now that we can hire someone and they don't have to physically be present in Hawaii. But for them to be paid, they have to be in the US. We couldn't hire someone in France and somehow magically pay them in France. That's not possible. So that's, a little tricky, since it's not necessarily clear if we can entice anyone to move to Hawaii right now, right? I mean, it's with travel. So certainly for a while, we couldn't do that. I mentioned the grant starts in July, so we aren't going to hiring anyone right away anyway. So things could have changed a little bit in July. Maybe if we're lucky, people can actually move. But I think some telecommuting is likely to happen during the first year. And of course, if I'm in Oxford, anyone who flies to Hawaii will still be telecommuting with me in Oxford. So there will definitely be some new mode of working with people where we do more stuff online. And Leo had some good ideas of how to sort of make sure things move forward with a combination of Zoom meetings and Slack and what's the third one? What's one more thing?
Yeah, GitHub.
GitHub, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Keep track of things. So that'll be an interesting thing. So we're reformatting the ad to fit this Research Corporation of UH format for an ad, and I'll send that to probably the core members to just have a look at that, and then we'll slowly move that forward. Anyone have any thoughts or comments on the postdoc and how it should be executed? Well, we have time. Yeah. I mean, we'll start pushing paper.
I would say not more than that you have discussed it at all.
Yeah, it's more like an update, right? I mean, once we start doing a advertisement and we have a search going and we have candidates, then of course we all will be involved in some sort of screening process and interviews and all that stuff. That will happen, and that can happen before. That could happen now. We could start now. We could advertise next week and start the process. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't wait until July. Obviously, we can start with this.
So one thing, if it's gonna be, I mean, from personal experience, it was really, really handy having Paul just down the hall to get started with everything. Particularly because we do have more documentation on the processes now, but it's still pretty tough for someone who has no familiarity with the code base to get started. There's a lot of little tricks to compiling, and so there's a lot of stuff that isn't fully documented, or worst case scenario, the documentation wasn't updated when the process was updated.
Yeah.
So for the remote thing to work, we need to be better at communicating what we're doing and updating these guides, because if this person is supposed to be sitting at their office and trying to hack away at things, even if there's a weekly Zoom meeting, they're still going to need good written material.
Yeah.
Or the calls are going to have to be almost daily, I guess. Either that, or they'll just struggle quite a bit.
Right. No, I think you're right about that. And of course, this has been a weakness a long time, like an onboarding process for anyone new coming in to get up to speed without spending, a decade to slowly get it by osmosis. So that's something I have to, since I'll be the one who gets stuck with the problem, I'll have to try to come up with some more material on this. So we've done a tiny bit, like I posted how to debug GMT in Xcode. Right? So someone coming to do that, at least they can at least get this up to speed without, you know, spending all the time I did to figure out how to do it. So, but there's many little things like that that will just show up and be forgotten about because it's so obvious to us that, but it's not to a new person. So I will spend some time trying to flesh out what those steps are, and then we'll share that, and then you guys can add to it. And the less experience you have, the better it is in a sense to point out things that are problematic.
Yeah, maybe Dongon can say something about that because he came in completely remote, right? We only really met in person at AGU, or was it
a couple of years ago?
Was it AGU or was it Scripps?
AGU.
AGU.
Yeah.
I think I'm still not familiar with code base of GMT. Yeah. So mostly I'm working on the CMake script, the continuous integration, and also the Mac supplementary package. And I tried to read the code of the GMT code, and I think it's somehow difficult for me to understand the details. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, so when the bug reports come in, I tend to be the one who go and look at them because I wrote most of that code, and it, you know, and I have to spend time to get into it and see what was going on. So there's a forensic science aspect to it that takes me time too, even though I might have written it. I have to get in to see actually what is the problem and then what the solution might be. So that it's hard to generalize to anyone else coming in, I think. Yeah. So I'm trying right now to make it little easier to navigate GMT. I've been spending some time, ended up writing a little C code to analyze how many functions do we have and are they called the right things, and is there consistency in names and all that stuff. So we have something like 3,700 functions in the collective, and you know, half of them are static and only used in one file or something like that. But there are a whole bunch of them, several hundred that are in the developer library. And folks like Joachim are using some of those, and folks like Dave Carest in MB System are using some of these things. They're not documented really, but they're, you know, long time functions that do stuff. And then there's many hundred that are just used internally within the libraries, you know. So I'm trying to impose a naming convention so that when you get an error message in this function, it's obvious which file and what function that function has because of the name, instead of, you know, junk function 7. Like, where is that and what's its purpose? Well, you have to go through the whole code and find it and learn about it. So I think for new people, this is probably the ones that are most helpful for. For me, it's just been renaming functions, but I think for other people, to have some sort of system in what we call things, it helps a little bit. That's a little more structure. And I can imagine this extending to some constants and maybe even variable names. But it shouldn't really be visible to the, you know, the users or the users of the API. The API won't change in that sense, but some internal things might change. And I've focused on static functions right now, so it certainly shouldn't affect Joachim or anyone else, or Python for that matter. But at some point, we may have to discuss what can happen. So that's sort of trying to get ready for having a postdoc coming in and looking at the code from that perspective. Yeah, Joachim.
Yeah, I think I'm the one that, aside from you, have dived most in the code. And every time I try to fix a bug, it takes me a long time. I cannot memorize things. One thing for a long time I've been saying, it's even more important, doesn't matter the priority of importance, but is the code length, the function length. We have very long functions. So you said 27,000 functions?
3,700.
100, okay, but you cannot, I don't want to say duplicated them, but we need to have a lot more. especially because there are many code chunks that are very long. So when you try to debug, and I go with the debugger step by step jumping, I spend times and times going back to the same place, and it's really I cannot. I did that several times during several years. I cannot memorize it. Now every time I have to do again since the beginning with the step F10, F10, F10 till I reach more or less to the point where the problem resides. Yeah. So it's that, and it's well concentrated on I/O. I/O is terrible. Those are the things that someone that comes, perhaps one thing you could start to do is breaking functions, breaking coding functions, which is not obvious because there are many variables that you need to know. And if you break it in functions, I know you have to send in the information so that they are available inside the function. So it's not something that you do easily. No, you when you do that, we'll start doing many errors need to be fixed, but that's an important thing to make the code more comprehensible to read. Well, I understand if Dong has tried really, well, there are some, well, perhaps the worst is GRD view, but it's known because it has kilometers. If you print it, there's some kilometers in length, or used to have, but that's one problem that I see in the code.
Yeah, I agree with the Joaquin. So for someone to break up the functions, well, this is something that can be done in conjunction, right? So if you're breaking up a function, one thing you have to guarantee is that the combined thing still works, right? And that's where having not only tests of the plotting scripts, but also having unit tests for each function, that's where that comes in. Yeah. So this is one good thing that can come off from the postdoc working on breaking these things up, is that so if you get a huge function that has a bunch of I/O, if you strip them out at the same time as you're doing that, you can write the tests. And yeah, so just say that this is a good time to, as we're doing this refactoring, it's a good time to add actual unit tests to the functions themselves, not only the plotting scripts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So we are planning to take all the modules, I guess, and at least the ones that make sense for separate out the I/O from the function behavior itself. So that means down the road there will be, I guess, a separate set of API functions that, because the current ones have the I/O built into them, and we probably won't break that, but we'll probably have a second set of functions that the I/O is completely separated. So I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but just take one function, surface. Right now, GMT surface for the C programmers, it does everything. It does everything like the module always does. But in the future, there will be a version of surface C function that you pass in arrays, and out comes a grid, and there's no I/O. Right. So that's just, we have to think about how we're going to design that and what to call these things. Because I don't think we can throw away the old API. It will just still be there, but it will also be probably rewritten in terms of the new API functions that will result. So as with everything else, it's we can't start from scratch. We've talked about that many times. We can't just throw everything away and start building a new GMT because we don't have the time and the money. So it's just trying to find that balance where we fix, it's like exponential decay thing. We have to do the most important things with the resources we have, and certain things won't be dealt with, at least not in the short term. And yeah, breaking functions up, it's probably best done in the conjunction with the refactoring of the modules, because that's when you have to do some of that anyway. You just simply have, because of the I/O. And we can sort of, I guess, instruct the person who's going to be helping with this to be on the lookout for things like that. And I guess that sounds very computer science related versus retraining a geophysicist kind of thing. So I guess we should talk about what kind of candidates are we thinking of for this postdoc position if we wanted to do a lot of C programming and C coding. Is that a different search than what gave us Leo, for instance?
Well, at least have it opened. Ideally, we would like to have a geophysicist who knows, is proficient in C, of course. But if we don't get, this is more, it does not be a computer science, but someone who has experience in computing. I mean, does not have to be someone with a degree in computer sciences, but an experimented, or at least reasonable experimented programmer is more needed for the task than the geophysicist that knows only a little bit and will not end up to be a help person.
Yeah, we have, obviously a lot of geophysics experience in this group. So it's not like we need someone to come in with more geophysics experience for anything particular, but they probably should be really good coder. Otherwise, it'll be an endless babysitting operation to explain all kinds of stuff. I mean, that was my initial concern for the first postdoc, which ended up with Leo, is that, do we hire some person who is a coder and then supervise just a straight employee? And I just worried that I would be spending my entire day trying to explain why things are done certain ways, because they're not a geophysicist and they're not a scientist. Maybe it's just a gulf of difference in terms of how to communicate. So, and then having Leo on board, it sort of validated that choice. This was completely the correct decision to have made. So that was good. So I'm sort of definitely very biased towards someone with a science background that can code versus just a coder, right? So we are talking about a PhD level person in a postdoc. So there will be, a very high functioning individual regardless of what we do. So I'm sure we can find candidates, and with this global recession probably happening, we might get a lot of candidates. Oh, I see Walter's in the waiting room. We should admit Walter.
Oh. Oh, I know.
See if he can get in. Or maybe gets kicked out. No, there he is. Hi, Walter. Can you hear us and see us?
Oh, yes.
It's not clear.
He's looking. Oh, yeah. Waving at least.
All right.
One thing you can do in the top right corner, there's a little button that says gallery view, and then you can see everyone instead of just the person who's speaking.
Yeah, I have it on the gallery. So I see everybody. Walter, can you hear us? Okay, we're good. Do you want to? So you came a little bit late, so we've gone around the table and given a few-minute update of life. Do you want to tell us a few minutes about your life status?
Well, I'm still alive.
That's good.
There's still no toilet paper or paper towels in the stores. Bread, pasta, canned goods, everything is hard to find. That's about it, I guess. I apologize for joining late. I also have another mandatory video conference at work at the same time. So I have that one in the background and sound turned off, but it looks to them like I'm participating. So now I'm where I really want to be. So sorry I was late.
Like the students do when we are keeping the classes.
That's all my classes, yeah. That's good. All right, so we're talking about the postdoc and the skill set that we hope the postdoc can bring, and it will be quite a bit of more C programming than what we envisioned in the first round when we got Leo, right? Because this is more refactoring the whole package to make it more manageable down the road. So that's important. I should mention that Leo and I also have a NASA proposal still pending. We don't know what will happen there. We had learned a lot of good lessons about the NASA proposal process. So the second one, I think, is actually pretty strong, but we don't know. And if that won't happen, there will actually be support for another postdoc to go much more in the direction of Python and external interfaces. So we sort of separate those things out, but you know, it's unlikely we will get that one funded, I think, it's realistically speaking. So one postdoc is pretty good, good deal anyway. So let's see. So okay, so I guess for the postdoc, I'll be sending out a second pass of the job descriptions and maybe a little bit more specifics, because the hiring process, they want a lot of, you know, details about tasks and management and things like that. So I have to sort of spell that out, which is probably good if we're going to do a lot of telecommuting anyway, to have some sort of process to evaluate. It'll be a little bit different. The other things on the list here was the GMT 6.1 release plan. And I think we've fallen into the standard trap where we keep adding stuff and we keep adding stuff and it never ends. And deadlines, soft deadlines come and go very quickly because there's always one more thing to deal with. And then Christoph points out a bug and then we have to deal with that. And, you know, it's a cycle. So I think we're good to do a 6.1 pretty quickly. Any thoughts?
Well,
okay, I promise not to find any more bugs for the moment.
No, keep them coming. That's fine. They don't all have to be addressed in the same release.
but you have to finish the renaming, all the renaming, since you already start to merge it in master. It has to be finished before the 6.1.
Yeah, I can probably do that pretty quickly. There's a lot of simple things to do. And I guess I would need Joachim's help to test something to see if you don't break anything in Julia, because I don't know, or if you can send
I know, I've been looking all the functions that you renamed, because, well, I've scrolled them, all of them, yeah. Although it would have been too late because you merged them during the night. But I don't have many. Right. I only have a couple that they are not API, that they are being used. What like I've said, what I do not like is some of them might be useful in future. So it's more on that I keep an eye to not close them.
Yeah.
The fact that they are not being used now, and for example, Julia is ideal to test functions. You can call the functions directly, just with a C call. Okay, the trouble is to prepare the data to send in and get it back. But it's ideal for testing, because really you can do that with 1 or 2 lines per function. Depends, but they cannot be closed. They have to be exported. Only the exported ones are accessible. You put them; those that will be made static will not be able to be accessed like that. Only sure. Then only C code that calls them indirectly can be used.
Yeah. The other thing I'm trying to do is to minimize the number of functions that are exported in the library, right? By making more static functions to keep things more locked away. And it's a lot of things can be done quite easily there. We very often have the case where we declare a function in one file and then it's only used in another file. But because it's in separate files, it has to be exported. And we just carry that baggage around instead of moving the function to the file where it's used, and the only place it's used.
There are two kinds of exportations. I don't know. One is for the GMT itself. The other one is to make them, well, when you say export, they will be visible in the shared libraries for externals.
Yes.
It's a different type of exporting that you are referring. You have to export one function from one, because it lives in one source code and is being accessed on another source file. I mean, yes. That's a different type of exporting.
Yeah, I think in Unix.
No, at the end it ends up to be there will be some overlapping, because if you export them, they will be visible through the shared libraries. But the idea, they were exported because they need to be visible in another source code. So it's
right.
Yeah. Of exporting.
Yeah, I just want to minimize. We shouldn't export 4,000 functions.
Yes.
because people started using them, and then we're told that there's no documentation, and why did you change the arguments and all that stuff. So we want to minimize that. That's sort of a good idea to begin with, I think, but it's sort of unclear what the usage is, but I guess I'm only going to worry about you with Julia and MB system, and anyone else will have to complain and work around it, I think. I don't think there's that many people calling non-API functions. Should we talk a little bit about remote workshops? Because that's something that probably gonna have to be dealt with. So the concept there is that we have planned several physical workshops that are now being kind of canceled or moving online. And what would a crash course in GMT look like completely given by Zoom? Do we want to do that? Do you guys want to help with that? How do we run these things?
I think that the biggest challenge is going to be getting people set up on their computers, because that's where we really are frantically running around the room and just trying to make sure everything has a working setup, because everyone's computers is entirely different.
Yeah.
So if we're doing an online workshop, I would recommend having some sort of hosted solution for the
participants
for working with GMT. So using something like Binder or some remote server somewhere, so that they're not installing things from the start. Because that way we can teach them GMT, and then once they know GMT, we can worry about teaching them how to install GMT, which is a whole other problem.
Yeah, I guess from the workshops we did, there's different kinds of problems, right? I mean, there's always 10% of the participant who sucks up 80-90% of the oxygen because they have 11 thumbs or 9 thumbs or some odd number of thumbs. It just doesn't work. And
they arrive without GMT installed.
Yeah. So there's all kinds, there's a high maintenance kind of crowd, and I don't see that translate really well to online. It's like the hand will come up all the time. Hey, I'm stuck. I don't understand. So that's a concern. The install part, I think the problems we had was mostly Linux, wasn't it? Because if you do the Mac OS bundle or the Windows installer, it's sort of done. Because I've done a couple of these tech seminars at UH with students, and the only time we got into trouble is that, oh, my Fedora version is too old, or CentOS doesn't have this library. There's all this Linux type thingy where they don't have enough, and we don't have an installer for Linux like that. So we do assume they have ability to install the prerequisites themselves and then build from source. And Ubuntu is years behind and all that stuff. So that's where the problems come in mostly. But also, most of the Linux people are a little bit more used to that kind of stuff than the random Mac person or the Windows person. So I think it's gotten a little bit better in that sense, that most people are able to install without too much trouble. But I understand we can't really help people with in the same way we do in a physical room. So that's certainly a good point, Leo. The other thing with these workshops is that the plan was to fly people to these places. Like we have the UNAVCO thing, and UNAVCO will support people to attend, the developers, for instance. And that's nice, but it's also time in general. You spend a lot of time getting there, and now of course it may not even happen. So I guess you don't have to commit to anything right now, but if anyone is interested in being part of an online workshop down the road, we should count heads and see if this is doable.
Yeah.
Because it's probably going to take more than one person anyway. It gets overwhelming trying to see who is raising their hands on the participant. It's a hard enough time running a faculty meeting with 25 people and trying to keep track of whose hand is up on the sidebar. It gets a little daunting. You really need someone else to sort of help with running things. So we can talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I took part in a virtual conference last week, and they had, I think it was close to 70 people on the Zoom call. with like speakers and discussion sessions and stuff like that all going on. The way that they were organizing this is that they had a shared Google Docs for each day that everyone had access to.
Right.
They had Zoom, but no chat in Zoom. And they also had a full Slack, like a Slack workspace for everyone.
Yeah.
And what they had was one person speaking and coordinating, but then they had other people who were just looking at the chat.
Yeah.
Right. And then relaying that information to the person coordinating. They had one person just looking at the shared docs where people were typing in question and then relaying those questions to the person presenting.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to run a workshop like that, the one who's speaking is not going to be able to keep an eye on the chat where the questions are going to be coming in.
I agree.
Right. So then what helpers can do is one or two people can keep an eye on the chat and answer things. And if we have a shared document, we could have a third person then just looking at that shared document and seeing what's coming up there.
Yeah. Hey, Walter.
I just wanted to share, I've been participating in some things that have been over Zoom that have like between 150 and 200 participants, but it's clear that there are only 2 or 3 people who are going to need to present. And you have a technical person running who manages everybody's connection and makes sure that people who should be muted are muted and that sort of thing. And also, as much as can be pre-computed for presentation as possible is done. Like you have, slides of text you can put up or bits of video or whatever. So it isn't just a talking head. In other words, the feed that's going out switches between a talking head leader and some pre-canned thing that maybe the leader is reading, but the text or something is also there. I think we should remember that if we're bringing in people whose first language is not English, and particularly with voice over IP with multiple people on a call or something gets really broken up and terrible, we should expect that the leader's words spoken into the video are not really going to convey very much information, and it will be helpful if part of the video feed every few seconds is a slide with text or a picture or something. I think that's going to be easier for people to understand during the live feed and also easier for people to use later if the video is captured and made available online later.
Yeah, those are good points. I think
while I have my mic open, I'd say one more thing. We can plan this without caring what vehicle is going to carry it to people. But I would not at this moment assume that it's going to be Zoom and build it around a feature that is only Zoom. I don't know if all of you guys have seen this, but there's been a lot of press reports in the US about problems with Zoom. The state attorney general of the state of New York is looking into bringing a legal case against them. The New York City or the New York State superintendent of schools will not let any schools in New York use Zoom for online learning. Unfortunately, both my daughters are required to use it right now. There are published hacks that allow users to take control of the video camera and the microphone of a Mac while Zoom is running. There have been Zoom bombings where people hack into a meeting and throw stuff up that was not wanted. The Zoom company said that it used end-to-end encryption, but it doesn't. They said they fixed these hacks, but they have not. They say, oh, well, we're trying to keep up, but our user base grew enormously, but it's not really clear that they're trying to solve any of these technical problems. And we are not allowed at NOAA, in our part of the US government, we're not allowed to use Zoom for US government business meetings. They haven't yet told me that I can't use Zoom on my US government issued laptop for personal meetings. So I'm still doing it, but I'm a little bit worried because I'm a Mac OS and maybe somebody's captured my video camera and maybe I'm a porn star now and don't know it.
Yeah, can happen. Can happen to all of us, Walter. No, I think those are very good points. I'm aware of some of those things too. We have the same issues here with, everybody teaching online. So no, that's fine. We'll, it could be Google Meet or something down the road. I think when we did the UNAVCO workshop, and we had a group of people that were remotely connected for that one as well. We had all the material in Google Slides that they all could get to separately from the communication part and could follow along. So it'll probably be some sort of a mix like that, I assume, as we go down, and we'll use what we had from last year as a starting board, as a launching board. Okay, Joachim wanted to bring up issues of try to improve the support in GMT for geometries. So that's sort of GIS speak for various types of geometries that we should support. And we've done a lot of stuff sort of ad hoc in GMT when it comes to this, the whole shapefile issue and understanding what's in there. Joachim, do you want to sort of set the stage a little bit for what you were thinking? And unmute, please.
Yeah. Well, one thing I did during these weeks, I revisit the OGR read function and the functionality that I import through Julia, and I see I can read all the geometries. I think I can read all the geometries are not only shape files, the GeoSon, the other, whatever format that OGR reads that has the geometries, I import them into that function. But then I don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
And I also thought that when we have our multi-segment files that are text files, that started with that. We could have some key on the header to tell it what type of geometry it is about, because we can have all of that. We can say that this segment is a polygon. We can say it's a line segment. Perhaps we can say the top header that is a multi-polygon or a geometry collection, even if you want. So if we put something in the headers that identify the segments, we can use that for the reading, because at the end it will end up on the data segment, and the data segments do not have. They have it, but they don't use it. They cannot have it, and I don't understand it completely what they have. The notion of the geometry, because the nums are there with the names, and I send that issue I posted two type of enums. One uses the classical names, other one is if there is a question, is geometry, is polygon, things like that. So the concept is floating around, but it's not well sedimented. Yeah. And we would need to have the data sets should have a clear field to say this segment, what type of geometry it is, or a node. Mm-hmm. And that's what I missed. It was I was about to work a bit more on this, but well, what do I do with this? I don't know where to put this information, where to get it from. So the thing is, the data sets should have a clear identification of what geometry the data respects to, because all the rest is there, but we don't have that. What we do with this, probably not much for now, but we'll be needing that for later. But yep. We don't need that GMT format almost anymore. It's just a question I told you, but because the IO is so complicated, I never really dare to invest trying to convert my own structure that I imported from what I had in Miron and to put it into the data sets. But as I have shown you in the couple of examples, the latest was the Cabo Verde one that Christoph is so keen about. Is what your business with Cabo Verde? Oh, none of my business, but so curious. We can read shapefiles directly. We don't need to copy them into a multi-gigabyte text file that we have to read again. We can read them directly. We can already do that in GMT, except that we don't know what to do with the data, because that data needs to be carried to the data sets. And
sure,
probably more work to rewrite, because at the moment I really we don't want to make copies. Okay, but those are technical details of things. My point with the geometries is we need to put the geometries into the data sets.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, this is all sort of ad hoc, that when we first started writing GMT, we wasn't even aware of these things. We were aware that there were things called polygons, but we didn't think of, the GIS, the hierarchy of things in there. So it was just plain ASCII files with some random headers.
There wasn't any GIS when we started running GMT.
Yes, this is also true.
Oh,
and then when
there was grass.
well, grass.
There was grass.
Grass.
Grass
Yeah,
is
we
a
didn't know
bit.
about grass. We didn't know
In
about
1986 and 7?
Yes, grass is older than GMT. It's the only one that's older than GMT is grass.
Before internet, we didn't know about these things, until much later. I was going to say that. So the problem there was that when this guy in New Zealand wanted to translate shapefiles into a GMT ASCII format, and he hired Frank Warnerdam, who was part of the Gedal team, to do that. We had to add in a bunch of support in GMT to deal with these things. So that's why it's a lot of ad hoc checking for OGR headers and keeping track of some geometries, but it's all, not very ideal, right? So it was just bolted on top of something that wasn't meant to support that. So as often is the case, the best solution is to rip all that out and start from scratch. But we may not have that time and ability and money to do that. So, but to carry some geometry around in the data sets, that we can figure out a way to do. So I'll look at what the various options are. Since we're talking about an ASCII table, it has to be some sort of comment in the header, right? So that can be reproduced and decoded. And we have one geometry command line option, the lowercase -a, which is used to specify aspatial things and geometries and a whole bunch of stuff. So it might be that just that option will be allowed on the segment header, and then we have a mechanism of interpreting that, for instance. I don't know.
There was no. Yes, sir. I was not referring only to the multi-segments. I was also referring internally to the data sets, the structures. Having that here,
that's right.
And then carry that into the structure, because when you read through OGR read, you don't go through the multi-segment. You read directly whatever vector file you are reading. So at that time it will need to land directly on the C structs.
Yeah, right.
The multi-segment is a parallel one. It's one you can write with a text editor. It's both simple things. They are very handy because you don't need all the times to deal with megabytes, gigabytes of data. Sometimes it's just small things that are much more handy that you do with the text, that stupid shape files that had 4, 5, 6 a variable number of companion files to be dealt with, and then they are double precision all the time, when you probably could do things with ints and save a fourth of the memory and things like that.
Yeah. Now, if you look at the C structure definitions of the data sets, it's a question: do we break backward compatibility with some of these things? Because the data set structure has a list of data tables, and each data table has a list of segments. And there are some OGR geometry-related structures that are sort of hidden away in there. It's just a question: how do we carry that forward? I'm just looking at it right now. So this,
I would have to find it.
Yeah, because we added some. There are some things that ideally you just redo them, but then you break backward compatibility. So there's always.
Yes, I know. And when the issue that I posted, I raised it. That point as well. That will that break compatibility or not?
I'll look at a couple of things. The one thing you mentioned was that we have some sort of duplicate set of the constants that reflect, I am a polygon. So like 2 different words that says I'm a polygon, and one has the value 7, the other one has the value 5. So that's all stupid, right? That's sort of internal. It doesn't matter what those numbers are, but we shouldn't have 2 separate enums for the same thing, with slightly different spelling. So there's some legacy waste there that I can try to clean up. That's like a first step to do. And then I can look at what it would take to carry the geometry information consistently in these structures. So I can at least look at that and report back and see what I think is a reasonable plan. Yeah, Joachim also messed around with some calls from the geos library to get a buffer around lines and things like that. And we found in the process that GMT incorrectly computed centroids of polygons. It did the mean value of the vertices instead of the centroid, which was not the same thing, because if you have a lot of point density, it moves over there. So it was good. So I rewrote that whole thing. So the spherical, the calculation of spherical areas and centroids of spherical polygons is now correct spherically, not elliptically, ellipsoidally, but spherically, and they didn't used to be. So it turns out we have the SG3PAC library from Renka that we've been using forever for spherical triangulation. It had code to compute the area of a spherical triangle. And then for a general polygon, it's just breaking a polygon into a bunch of triangles. And then for each triangle, the centroid is simply the mean location of the 3 points. And then the centroid of the polygon is a weighted sum of all those mean points weighted by the areas and so on. So it's kind of like a trapezoidal rule on the sphere. So that seems to have been working fine now. I tested it with a bunch of cases. And it changed some GMT examples because now the areas were approximated with a equal area projection and done Cartesian calculations. So it couldn't be the same thing because great circles became straight lines on that projection and weren't actually doing stuff on the sphere. So that's all good. But see, what else can I say about it? I think that was all about that. I'm just looking at the clock. We're coming up on the hour. We wanted to have these kinds of meetings somewhat more frequently, but not too long and exhausting. So have a shorter agenda. And this was the very first one. So it, a little bit more rambling maybe than we might want to do in the future. Have a little bit more specific agenda items to discuss for the team. So I'm thinking of closing it down shortly. Any final words of wisdom or thoughts before we do so?
Christoph, I like it. I have not had time to look at your examples, but I know that you replied to Leo, but that's a request they had made some weeks before. But I wanted, I like it very much, your artistic lines that you made, and I've not looked at the scripts how you do it. So perhaps you could have some of those examples as well, because I don't know, they're perhaps not
May
very.
I interrupt you just a moment?
Yeah.
You were broken up a little bit because my internet connection is not that stable at the moment. Would you just summarize it again, please? Just for me, please. I just didn't get it.
Okay. I said that you posted something that I had not time to read in the response to what Leo had asked you for documentation. I have not had time to read that. I just saw it, but I also saw your very nice figures with those artistic lines that
Okay.
when you were looking for the gaps that change its size, and the quoted lines and that can do wonders. And you posted a lot of very nice lines. They are not lines, shape, artistic things there. If you could make also that as nice examples, how to plot those lines that look like chords. I don't know if those things for the sheets, they really tangle around and things like that. So that would be nice.
Okay, I'll do something like this for you. Okay, I can do this. Yeah.
No.
That's great. Yeah, we should harvest some more ideas like that. Those are really cool examples. Because we're talking about redoing how we do the documentation, for instance, to document things a little differently than we currently do. That's something we'll have to do during the next 3 years. So we need a plan for that as well. All right.
Christoph, you'll probably be pinged about that since I'm guessing you're a heavy user of the documentation.
Yeah, I use it quite a bit, yeah. And actually, I must admit, I'm still using the old PDF file from the 5.4 version because it's way easier to search through than the current online documentation. But that's only maybe a usage point from my side, yeah.
Search box on the documentation on HTML, that it works well. I often also forget to use it, but it works pretty well in all the pages. When you have the documentation open,
yeah, on the left hand side, just above the
you can search that box. It works pretty well.
Yeah.
Maybe I have to get used to it a bit more.
Yeah. We're probably not going to go back and build PDF documentations again. These things change every 10 years. Who knows what we'll do in 10 years? But yeah, those days are probably behind us. All right, guys. Thanks all for showing up at different time zones. This was kind of fun. We'll sort of regroup and figure out the frequency of these kinds of things. Walter has a hand up, I see. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's great to see everybody. And thank you all for being here. And Paul, I want to congratulate you for keeping this to around an hour. I've been doing this about twice a week with my work colleagues. Each time that an hour is scheduled, it ends up taking an hour and a half. And finally, we realized we have to split into subgroups, and the entire team doesn't need to discuss for half an hour something that only 2 people in the team are really working on. So we're going to start having subgroup meetings. But for now, I mean, as long as people have the time and they're feeling alone and socially isolated, well, why not hang out together? It's great to see you all. Thanks.
Yeah. Likewise, it's like, in the movie I Am Legend. You walk around and suddenly you see another human being and you just freak out. It's like there are other people. It's a little strange. So, yeah. Well. Yeah, so we'll do this again, well, I think we'll stick to an hour. I think it's a good time to not go beyond that, and real work doesn't really happen right during these Zoom things. It's more just talk story and big picture, and then we can follow up individually with the other media. So thanks again, guys. We will post all this stuff, and you'll hear from me about when the next one might happen. So stay safe and take care.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll copy and paste the agenda on the forum thread.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Good seeing you all.
You too.
See you, everyone.
See you, gentlemen.